He wasn't supposed to stay, and yet something in the air refused to let him leave. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you believe loyalty can break even the strongest command, stay with me, because this one doesn't end the way you think. The morning light over the base came in pale and thin, stretching across rows of concrete like it had somewhere else to be. The scent of metal and dust hanging low, quiet, too quiet, as if the place itself was holding its breath. Staff Sergeant Lucas Warren walked toward the gate with slow, measured steps, boots crunching against gravel, a duffel slung over his shoulder that felt heavier than it should, not because of what was inside, but because of what he was leaving behind. No ceremony, no handshake, just a single order delivered without eye contact. You're done here. And that was it. Behind him, lined across the training yard in perfect formation, sat 47 German shepherds, each one trained, disciplined, loyal to command above all else, their bodies still, ears forward, eyes locked ahead like statues carved from instinct and obedience. Lucas stopped for half a second, just long enough to feel it, the silence pressing against his chest, wrong in a way he couldn't explain, because dogs like these didn't stay quiet, not when something mattered, not when someone they knew was walking away. A breeze cut across the yard, carrying the faint scent of oil and something sharper beneath it, something Lucas couldn't quite place, but it made the back of his neck tighten. He didn't turn around, not fully, just enough to let his eyes drift over his shoulder, searching without admitting it. And that's when he saw it. One dog, just one, shifting, shadow, 6 years old, sable coat dark along the spine, amber eyes that had once tracked danger in places Lucas still tried not to remember, the kind of dog that didn't move without reason. The leash lay slack at his side, handler gripping it tighter now, whispering a command under his breath. But Shadow didn't sit back down. He stood, slow, deliberate, like he had made a decision no one else understood. The handler pulled once, then again, tension in the line, but Shadow's paws stayed planted, his body angled not toward the yard, not toward the handler, but toward Lucas, something. And that gaze hit harder than any order ever could. Lucas felt it in his chest, a quiet pressure, like a memory trying to surface, sand, heat, the echo of distant wind across open ground, and a pair of eyes just like that locking onto something unseen seconds before everything changed. Lucas swallowed, tightening his grip on the strap of his duffel, forcing himself to keep moving, because orders were orders, and this place had taught him that hesitation cost more than regret. Behind him, the silence held, 46 dogs still seated, unmoving, as if the moment didn't exist for them at all. But Shadow took one step forward. Gravel shifted under his paw. A small sound. Almost nothing, yet it cut through the stillness like a crack in glass. The handler's voice sharpened. Stand down. But Shadow didn't respond, not the way he was trained to. Instead, his head turned, just slightly, ears flicking, nose lifting as if catching something carried on the wind. The growl came low, not loud, but deep, the kind that didn't warn. It recognized, and it wasn't directed at Lucas. It was aimed somewhere else. Lucas stopped walking, not by choice, not really, but because something inside him said this wasn't over, that whatever was happening here wasn't about a transfer, or a dismissal, or a simple order to leave. It was something buried, something quiet, something that only one dog had chosen to break the rules for. And in that moment, with the sun barely rising and 46 trained K9s still locked in silence, Lucas realized the most dangerous thing on that base wasn't the order he had been given. It was the one command that had just been disobeyed the moment Lucas stopped. The world did not move with him. It held, stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. And in that fragile silent Shadow's growl settled into something deeper, not anger, not fear, but certainty. Lucas turned fully now, slow, deliberate. The way a man does when he already knows something is wrong but has not yet decided how much of it he is willing to face. The handler's grip tightened on the leash, boots shifting in the gravel, voice lower this time, controlled, Shadow heel. But the command fell flat, like it had nowhere to land. 46 dogs remained seated, disciplined to perfection, their stillness no longer impressive, but unsettling, like a room full of witnesses choosing not to speak. Lucas felt the weight of it press into his ribs, a quiet pressure that made breathing feel measured, intentional. Shadow's ears flicked again, his head turning a fraction more, nose lifting into the morning air, drawing in something invisible, something Lucas could not see but could almost feel, like the echo of a memory just out of reach. A faint scent rode the breeze, sharp, metallic, threaded with something chemical. Something out of place in a training yard that had always smelled of dust and routine. Lucas had learned long ago to trust what could not be explained in words, the shift in a room, the hesitation in a breath, the way a dog chose where to stand. "What is it, boy?" he said under his breath, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, not meant as a command, just a question offered into the space between them. Shadow answered without sound. One step forward, then another, the leash pulling taut, until it trembled, the handler bracing now, both hands gripping, eyes darting toward the command post as if waiting for permission to act. "Hold him." A voice called from behind, calm but edged, the kind of tone that expected obedience without question. Lucas recognized it without turning. Captain Reeves, precise, controlled, a man who built order out of silence. "Sergeant Warren." "You are dismissed," Reeves added, each word placed carefully, like pieces on a board, but Lucas did not move. Something had shifted inside him, not defiance, not yet, but attention sharpened into focus. Shadow's gaze locked past Lucas now, not on the yard, not on the gate, but on the line of buildings along the far side of the base, specifically one, a storage unit near the edge of the compound, its metal doors closed, its windows dark. Lucas followed the line of that stair, feeling the connection click into place like a puzzle piece he had not known he was missing. The breeze shifted again, carrying that same sharp scent, stronger now, enough to make him narrow his eyes. "Sir," one of the junior handlers said quietly, uncertainty slipping into his voice. "That is not a standard alert." And for a brief second, the certainty in the air cracked. Reeves did not respond immediately, and in that hesitation, small but real, Lucas felt it. The confirmation that this was no routine moment. Shadow's growl deepened, not louder, but steadier, anchored, his body angled protectively now, not just refusing to leave Lucas, but guiding him, pointing him, as if the choice had already been made. Lucas let the duffel slide from his shoulder, the weight hitting the ground with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have in the silence. 46 dogs still did not move, but the stillness no longer felt like control. It felt like pressure, like something waiting just beneath the surface. Lucas took a step back toward the yard, not away from the gate, but away from leaving, eyes fixed on that building, the one Shadow had chosen. "Sir," Lucas said, voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach Reeves without breaking. "Permission to check that unit." And for the first time since the order had been given, the chain of command did not feel absolute. It felt fragile. The wind moved again, the scent sharpened, and somewhere behind him, one of the seated dogs shifted ever so slightly, a paw adjusting against the gravel, as if the silence itself was beginning to crack. Captain Reeves did not answer right away, and in that silence Lucas felt the balance shift, not visibly, not enough for anyone to call it out, but enough for a man who had spent years reading the space between words. The wind moved again, brushing across the yard, carrying that same sharp scent from the far building, stronger now, undeniable, like something that did not belong trying too hard to stay hidden. Shadow stepped forward another inch, muscles tight but controlled, his growl fading into a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Not aggressive, not reckless, just certain. Lucas kept his eyes on Reeves, waiting, not pushing, because sometimes the truth revealed itself in hesitation more than in speech. "That area is restricted," Reeves finally said, voice even, measured, but there was a thin edge. Beneath it now, something almost imperceptible, like a crack beneath polished glass. Lucas nodded once, slow, respectful, but did not step back. "Understood, sir," he said, then paused, letting the words settle. "But that dog does not break command without cause." Behind him, one of the handlers shifted again, a quiet scuff of boot against gravel, and this time another dog adjusted its posture. Not standing, not yet, but no longer perfectly still. The silence was changing. Shadow's head tilted slightly, ears forward, eyes locked on that same building, as if every instinct in his body was pointing in one direction, one truth, one answer. Lucas remembered the desert, the way Shadow had once frozen mid-step, refusing to move forward when everything looked clear, and seconds later the ground ahead had revealed what eyes could not see. He trusted that instinct more than any report, more than any order written on paper. "Let me check it," Lucas said again, quieter this time, not as a challenge, but as a request grounded in something deeper than rank. Reeves exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing just a fraction, calculating, weighing, and for a moment the entire yard seemed to lean into that decision. The breeze shifted once more, stronger now, rattling the loose edge of a metal panel on the distant building, a hollow clank echoing across the space. Shadow's body reacted instantly, posture tightening, a soft whine escaping before settling back into that low hum, as if the sound had confirmed what he already knew. Lucas took another step toward the yard, away from the gate, each movement deliberate, giving Reeves the chance to stop him, to reassert control, but no command came. Instead, there was only that thin, stretching silence, and in it, something unspoken passed between them. 2 minutes. Reeves said at last, the words quiet but heavy. "You look, and you leave." It was not permission, not fully, but it was enough. Lucas gave a single nod, then turned, not toward the gate, but toward the building Shadow had chosen. The gravel crunched under his boots as he moved, steady, measured, the distance between him and the truth shrinking with each step. Behind him, the handlers held their lines, but the formation no longer felt unbreakable. One dog shifted, then another, small movements, subtle, but real. Shadow moved with him now, the leash still in the handlers' grip but slackening with each step, as if even the man holding it no longer believed he could stop what was unfolding. The air grew sharper as they approached, the scent stronger, layered, unnatural against the familiar smells of the base. Lucas felt it settle into his lungs, a quiet warning, the kind that did not shout but lingered. He reached the edge of the building. The metal door standing still, closed, ordinary in every visible way, and yet everything about it felt wrong. Shadow stopped just short of it, sitting now, but not in obedience, in signal, his eyes lifting to Lucas, steady, unwavering, as if to say this was the place. Lucas rested his hand against the cool metal surface, feeling the faint vibration beneath it, or maybe it was just his own pulse reflecting back. And in that moment, he understood something simple and heavy all at once. Whatever was behind that door was the reason he had been told to leave. And whatever was behind that door was the reason Shadow had refused to let him go. Lucas did not open the door right away, his hand resting against the cold metal as if he could feel the truth through it, as if whatever waited inside was already pressing back. The surface carried a faint vibration, subtle, irregular, not loud enough to hear, only enough to sense. Like something alive but hidden, Shadow remained seated beside him, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the seam where the door met the frame, his breathing slow and controlled, but every muscle ready, every instinct locked onto the same point. Behind them, the yard no longer held its perfect stillness. A ripple had begun, small movements spreading through the line of dogs, a shift of weight here, a flick of ears there, as if the silence itself was unraveling thread by thread. Lucas exhaled slowly, steadying his hand, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because moments like this did not come with instructions, only consequences. He glanced back once, just enough to see Captain Reeves standing at a distance, arms crossed, posture composed, but the stillness around him no longer felt like control. It felt like containment, like a man holding something together that did not want to stay hidden. 2 minutes, Reeves called, his voice carrying across the yard, precise, measured, but it did not carry the same weight it had before. Lucas turned back to the door, fingers tightening around the handle, the metal cool against his skin, grounding. He paused for a fraction of a second, long enough to meet Shadow's gaze. The dog did not move, did not blink, only held that steady, unwavering look that had once meant danger and now meant truth. Lucas nodded, barely noticeable, then pulled. The door opened with a low, reluctant creak, the sound stretching into the quiet like something being revealed against its will. Inside, the air was different, heavier, carrying that same sharp scent but stronger now, layered with something sterile, something controlled, like a place that was not meant to be noticed. The light inside flickered faintly, fluorescent and pale, casting long shadows across rows of sealed containers stacked neatly along the walls. Each one labeled, each one ordered, each one too perfect. Lucas stepped inside, boots echoing softly against the concrete floor, the sound dull, contained, as if even noise was being kept in check. Shadow rose immediately and followed, the leash slipping loose from the handler's grip behind them, unnoticed or perhaps no longer resisted. The dog moved ahead of Lucas by a few inches, nose low, scanning, not rushing, not frantic, just certain. Lucas's eyes moved across the room, taking in details the way he had been trained to do. The spacing, the placement, the labels that seemed official but felt off. One container near the back drew his attention, not because it stood out, but because Shadow did. The dog stopped in front of it, body stiff, head tilted slightly, that low hum returning. Deeper now, more insistent. Lucas approached slowly, each step deliberate, the air growing sharper as he closed the distance. The scent almost metallic now, mixed with something chemical that did not belong in a standard supply unit. He crouched beside the container, running his hand along its surface, feeling the same faint vibration he had noticed on the door, but stronger here, concentrated, like the source of it all. His brow tightened, not in confusion, but in recognition, because this was not random. This was placed, hidden in plain sight. Behind him, footsteps approached, measured and controlled, Reeves entering the space without announcing it, his presence filling the room with a different kind of pressure, that is, classified. Reeves said, voice calm, but there was no longer any attempt to mask the tension beneath it. Lucas did not look back right away, his hand still resting on the container, Shadow beside him, unmoving. So is the reason you tried to send me away? Lucas replied quietly, his voice steady, not confrontational, just certain. The fluorescent light above flickered once, casting a brief shadow across the room. And in that moment, everything felt suspended, like the truth was no longer hidden, just waiting to be acknowledged. Shadow's gaze shifted from the container to Reeves, the growl fading into silence. But the message remained, clear and unyielding. Lucas finally stood, turning to face Reeves, the distance between them small now, but filled with something far larger than rank. Outside, through the open door, the yard stirred again, more dogs shifting, more movement breaking through the stillness, as if the moment inside this room had reached. Beyond its walls, Lucas held Reeves's gaze, not challenging, not accusing, just present, and in that quiet, undeniable space, it became clear that whatever had been hidden here was no longer willing to stay that way, because one dog had chosen not to be silent, and that choice had changed everything. Lucas did not step away from the container, not even when Captain Reeves closed the distance between them, because something in the room had already shifted beyond authority, beyond protocol, into a space where truth no longer asked for permission. The faint hum beneath Lucas's palm continued, steady and unnatural, like a quiet signal that refused to be ignored. Shadow stood pressed close to his side now, no longer scanning, no longer searching, just watching, his attention fixed on Reeves with a calm intensity that carried more weight than any bark ever could. Reeves stopped a few feet away, posture still composed, but the precision in it felt forced now, like a man holding a line that had already begun to blur. Step away from that unit, he said, voice low, controlled, each word placed carefully as if control could still be maintained through tone alone. Lucas slowly lifted his hand from the metal surface, not in compliance, but in acknowledgement, turning slightly so he could see both the container and the man in front of him. You felt it too, Lucas said quietly, not a question, not an accusation, just an observation offered into the space between them. Reeves did not answer immediately, and in that pause the fluorescent light above flickered again, casting a brief shadow that stretched across the sealed containers like a line being drawn. Shadow's ears twitched, his body shifting half a step forward, placing himself just slightly ahead of Lucas, not in defense, but in alignment, as if he had chosen where to stand and was not willing to move. Outside, the subtle movement in the yard grew more noticeable, The faint shuffle of paws against gravel, the quiet rise of breath from dogs who were no longer fully still, the silence breaking in pieces too small to call out, but too real to ignore. Lucas took a slow breath, the sharp scent in the air settling deeper into his chest, and with it came understanding, not of every detail, but of enough to know that whatever this was, it had been meant to stay unseen. You tried to send me away before I ever got close. To this, Lucas continued, his voice steady, grounded. And he knew, he added, glancing briefly at Shadow, whose gaze never wavered. Reeves's jaw tightened just slightly, a small movement, almost invisible, but Lucas caught it, because he had learned long ago that truth often revealed itself in what people tried not to show. That dog is reacting to stimulus, Reeves replied, choosing his words carefully. Nothing more, but the explanation felt thin, like something spoken out of necessity, rather than belief. Lucas let a faint breath escape, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, just recognition, because he had heard that kind of explanation before, in places where the truth had been inconvenient. Shadow shifted again, lowering his head slightly, nose brushing closer to the edge of the container, and this time a soft sound escaped him, not a growl, not a bark, but something quieter, almost like a warning meant only for Lucas. Lucas followed the motion, eyes tracing the seams of the container more carefully now, noticing the small details that had been easy to overlook at first glance, the labeling that seemed correct but was placed just slightly off-center, the seal that looked intact but carried a faint irregularity, the kind of detail that only stood out when something deeper felt wrong. His fingers hovered just above the latch, not touching, not yet, because this was the line, the moment where uncertainty ended and consequence began. Reeves took a step closer, closing the gap, his presence firm. "Sergeant Warren, that is an order," he said, and for a brief second the authority in his voice returned, sharp, defined, the way it had been at the gate. Lucas held still, feeling the weight of those words, the years of training that had taught him to respond without hesitation, to trust the chain of command even when it was difficult. But then he looked at Shadow. The dog did not move, did not blink, did not yield. There was no confusion there, no doubt. Only that same unwavering certainty that had once saved lives without needing explanation. Lucas inhaled slowly, the decision forming not as defiance, but as alignment, the same way a compass settles when it finds true north. "With respect, sir," Lucas said, voice calm, steady, carrying no challenge, only truth. "This is already beyond orders." The words hung in the air, quiet but immovable. Outside, one of the dogs barked, a single sharp sound that broke through the remaining silence like a crack of thunder in a clear sky. And then another followed, and another, not chaos, not panic, but recognition spreading through the yard. Shadow lifted his head slightly at the sound, then looked back at Lucas, and in that simple exchange, everything became clear. Lucas reached forward and placed his hand firmly on the latch, the cool metal grounding him for just a second longer before the moment tipped forward. Whatever was inside this container had been hidden for a reason, protected by silence, by order, by fear of what would happen if it was seen. But silence had already been broken, and once something chooses to be seen, it does not go back to being hidden. Lucas did not hesitate this time. The moment had already decided itself long before his hand touched the latch, and when his fingers closed around the cold metal, it felt less like a choice and more like a continuation of something that had been set in motion the second Shadow refused to sit. The room seemed to tighten around him, the faint hum inside the container growing clearer now, no longer imagined, no longer subtle, just present, steady, undeniable. Captain Reeves stepped closer, close enough that the weight of his presence could be felt without contact, his voice lower now, stripped of command and edged with something harder to define. "Do not open that," he said, and for the first time it sounded less like an order and more like a warning. Lucas paused, not out of obedience, but to understand the shift, because warnings did not come from authority, they came from knowledge. Shadow's body leaned forward slightly, not tense, not aggressive, but aligned, as if whatever was about to happen was exactly what needed to happen. Outside, the sound of the yard changed again, more dogs now breaking their stillness, a rising wave of movement that carried through the open doorway, not chaotic, not uncontrolled, but no longer silent. Lucas drew a slow breath, the air sharp in his lungs, and pulled the latch. The seal released with a soft click, a small sound that echoed louder than it should have in the confined space. Like the first crack in something long sealed, he lifted the lid just enough to see inside, not fully, not all at once, because some truths revealed themselves better in pieces. The interior was lined, insulated, controlled, and within it rested a series of compact containers, each one marked, each one arranged with careful precision. But what caught Lucas was not the organization, it was the inconsistency, the way the labels did not match the scent, the way the arrangement spoke of order, but the air carried something else entirely. Shadow's nose moved closer, hovering just above the opening, his breathing steady but focused, and then he let out a soft, low sound, not alarm, not fear, but recognition, the kind that came from instinct deeper than training. Lucas's eyes narrowed as he studied the markings more closely, reading them once, then again, the words clear, official, correct on the surface, and yet something about them did not align with what he felt, what he sensed, what Shadow had already confirmed. Behind him, Reeves did not move, but the stillness around him had changed, no longer composed, no longer controlled, but held, like a man waiting to see which direction something would fall. "Close it," Reeves said quietly, and this time there was no command in it, only urgency. Lucas did not respond right away, his attention still fixed on the contents, his mind moving through the pieces, connecting what did not fit, understanding not through explanation but through pattern, through the same instinct that had kept him alive in places where logic came too late. He lowered the lid halfway, not closing it, not yet, then looked up, meeting Reeves's gaze fully now. "This does not belong here," Lucas said, voice calm, steady, the kind of certainty that did not need to be raised to be heard. Reeves's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of acknowledgement that lasted only a second before it was gone. Outside, the barking grew stronger, not frantic, but unified, a chorus rising from dogs who had chosen, one by one, not to remain silent. Shadow stepped back slightly, then sat again, but this time the posture was different, not signaling, not warning, but confirming, as if the decision had been made and there was no need to press further. Lucas closed the lid gently, the click of the latch softer now, almost respectful, because whatever truth had been revealed did not need to be forced into the open to exist. He straightened slowly, shoulders settling, not in relief, but in acceptance. "You knew," Lucas said quietly, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what had become clear. Reeves exhaled, a long, controlled breath, his posture shifting just enough to show that something had been released, not resolved, but acknowledged. "Some things are not meant to be questioned," Reeves replied, but the words lacked the certainty they once carried. Lucas glanced toward the open doorway, where the yard now moved with life, dogs standing, handlers adjusting, the perfect formation broken not by chaos but by choice. He looked back at Shadow, whose eyes met his with the same steady calm, the same unwavering presence that had started all of this. And in that quiet moment, Lucas understood something simple and unchangeable. The truth had not been uncovered by rank or permission. It had been revealed by loyalty, by instinct, by a refusal to stay silent. And once that kind of truth steps forward, it does not ask to be hidden again. The room did not return to normal after the lid closed, because once something unseen becomes known, the space around it changes in ways that cannot be undone. Lucas stood still for a moment longer, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into place, not loud, not dramatic, but firm, like a truth that had finally found its ground. Outside, the sound of the yard continued to rise, not in chaos, but in awakening, one bark leading to another, until the silence that had once held everything together no longer existed. Shadow shifted beside him, stepping slightly closer, his presence calm now, no longer signaling or warning, but staying, as if the purpose that brought him here had already been fulfilled. Lucas turned toward the open doorway, the morning light spilling across the concrete floor in long pale lines. cutting through the dimness of the storage unit. And for a second, everything felt divided, inside and outside, hidden and seen. Before and after, Captain Reeves remained where he stood, his posture no longer rigid, but not relaxed either, something in between, like a man adjusting to a reality he could no longer control. "You should not have done that," Reeves said quietly, but there was no anger in it, only a kind of acceptance that came too late to change anything. Lucas glanced at him, not with defiance, but with understanding, because he recognized that tone, the moment when certainty gives way to consequence. It was already happening. Lucas replied, his voice low, steady. "I just did not ignore it." Reeves exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting toward the container for a brief second before returning to Lucas. And in that glance was everything he did not say. Outside, the handlers were no longer standing in perfect formation, some stepping forward, some looking toward the building, others trying to re-establish control over dogs that no longer responded the same way. Not disobedient, but aware, as if something had passed through them without a word. Lucas stepped toward the doorway, the gravel crunching faintly under his boots as he crossed the threshold back into the open air, the light warmer now, the wind stronger, carrying with it not just scent, but movement, life, change. Shadow followed without hesitation, the leash dragging loosely behind him, forgotten by the handler who no longer seemed certain what to hold on to. As Lucas emerged into the yard, several of the dogs turned their heads toward him. Not all, not in unison, but enough to feel like recognition, like a shift in attention that had not been there before. One of the younger handlers approached cautiously, his voice uncertain. "Sir, what is going on?" And Lucas looked at him for a moment, searching for the right answer, knowing there was not one that would fit into a single sentence. Something that should have been seen sooner. Lucas said finally, not offering more, because some truths needed time to settle before they could be explained. Behind him, Reeves stepped out as well, the space between them no longer defined by rank, but by what they now shared, knowledge that could not be undone. Shadow moved slightly ahead, stopping in the center of the yard, his posture calm, ears forward, watching, not guarding, not commanding, just present. One by one, the dogs that had remained seated began to stand, not in a rush, not in confusion, but in quiet sequence, as if responding to something deeper than instruction, something that did not come from a handler's voice. Lucas watched them, the movement spreading across the yard like a tide that had finally been allowed to come in. And in that moment, he understood that what had happened inside the building was not contained there. It had reached beyond walls, beyond orders, into something shared. Reeves stopped beside him, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "You realize this changes things." And Lucas nodded once, his eyes still on the dogs, on Shadow, on the way the silence had been replaced not by noise, but by awareness. "It already did," Lucas replied. The wind moved across the yard again, carrying away the last traces of that earlier stillness, and as Shadow turned his head slightly, looking up at Lucas with that same steady gaze, there was no urgency left, no warning, only quiet confirmation. Sometimes the moment that matters does not arrive with force or noise, it arrives in silence, and it leaves by changing everything. That silence once protected the yard no longer belonged to order the way it had before, not in the rigid, silent way that demanded obedience without question, but in something quieter, deeper, where every movement carried awareness. Lucas stood still, watching as the last of the dogs rose to their feet, not all at once, not commanded, but one by one, as if each had reached the same understanding in its own time. Shadow remained closest to him, steady, grounded, his posture no longer signaling or guiding, but simply present, like a line that had already been drawn and would not be crossed again. The wind moved across the base with a different weight now, lifting small traces of dust, carrying the faint scent from the storage unit out into the open air where it no longer felt contained. Handlers exchanged glances, their voices lower, uncertain, as if the rules they had relied on no longer explained what they were seeing. One of them stepped forward, reaching for a leash, then hesitated, his hand stopping mid-motion as the dog in front of him held its ground, not resisting, not disobeying, but choosing not to move until something made sense again. Lucas exhaled slowly, feeling the shift settle into his chest. Not heavy, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Beside him, Captain Reeves watched the yard with a quiet intensity, his earlier certainty replaced by something more measured, something closer to reflection than control. "They feel it," Reeves said under his breath, almost to himself, and Lucas nodded slightly, because there was no other explanation. That fit. The dogs were not reacting to noise or command. They were responding to something that had changed beneath the surface, something they had sensed before anyone else had allowed themselves to see. Shadow turned his head slightly, scanning the yard, then back to Lucas, his eyes calm, steady, no longer searching for confirmation, because it had already been found. Lucas crouched for a moment, resting his hand lightly against Shadow's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady rhythm of breath, grounding, real. "You knew before any of us," he murmured quietly, not expecting a response, but feeling one in the stillness that followed. Shadow leaned subtly into the contact, not as a demand, not as a need, but as acknowledgement. Behind them, the doors of the storage unit remained open, the dim interior visible from the yard now, no longer hidden, no longer separate. A few of the handlers began to move toward it, cautiously, not rushing, as if stepping into something that required respect rather than urgency. Reeves noticed, his posture straightening slightly, but he did not stop them, not this time. The line between restriction and reality had already been crossed. Lucas stood again, his gaze moving across the base, taking in the details that had once felt routine but now carried a different weight. The placement of structures, the spacing, the patterns that no longer seemed as clean as they once had. "This was not just about me leaving," Lucas said quietly, more to the air than to Reeves, and Reeves gave a faint nod, the kind that did not confirm or deny, but accepted the direction of the thought. The sound of paws against gravel filled the space now, soft but constant, a rhythm replacing the earlier silence, not chaotic, not loud, but alive. One of the older dogs stepped forward, moving closer to the storage unit, then stopped, sitting down a few feet away, watching, waiting, as if holding position not by command, but by understanding. Others followed, forming no perfect line, no strict formation, but a loose, natural arrangement that felt more honest than the rigid order before. Lucas watched it unfold, the quiet cooperation, the absence of forced control, and something in him eased, not because the situation was resolved, but because it had been seen. Shadow moved slightly ahead again, then paused, looking back at Lucas as if to confirm that there was nowhere else. They needed to go. Lucas gave a small nod, and for the first time since the order had been given, there was no pull toward the gate, no sense of leaving unfinished. The base did not feel the same, not broken, not undone, but changed in a way that could not be reversed. Sometimes it does not take a loud moment to shift everything, just a single refusal to stay silent, a single step taken when all others remain still. And once that step is taken, the rest of the world has no choice but to follow. In its wake, by the time the sun rose higher over the base, nothing looked the same. Even though every building still stood where it always had, every fence line unbroken, every path unchanged, the difference lived in something quieter, something harder to measure, the absence of blind silence and the presence of something earned. Lucas remained where he was, not because he had nowhere to go, but because for the first time, leaving was no longer the point. The gate behind him stood open. The order that once carried weight now reduced to something distant, almost irrelevant. Shadow sat beside him, calm, steady, his breathing slow and even, as if the storm that had never been visible had finally passed. Across the yard, the dogs had settled into a new kind of stillness, not the rigid formation they had held before, but a looser, more natural presence, some standing, some sitting, some watching the storage unit, others simply existing in a way that did not feel forced. Handlers moved more carefully now, their voices softer, their commands no longer automatic but thoughtful, as if they understood that what had happened could not be undone by returning to routine. Captain Reeves stood a few yards away, his gaze moving across the scene, not directing it, not controlling it, but observing it. And in that observation, there was something that had not been there before, a quiet acknowledgement that control had limits, and that those limits had been reached. Lucas glanced at him briefly, and there was no challenge in his expression, no need for it, because whatever line had once separated them had already shifted into something else. "You were right about one thing," Reeves said after a long moment, his voice carrying across the space without force. "Some things should not be ignored." And Lucas gave a small nod, not as agreement, but as recognition, because the truth had never belonged to either of them. Shadow turned his head slightly, watching as one of the younger dogs approached the edge of the open storage unit, then stopped, sitting down just outside the threshold, as if understanding where to draw the line without needing to be told. Others followed in quiet sequence, forming no pattern, no command structure, just a presence that felt aware. Lucas watched them. The subtle coordination, the absence of fear, the quiet understanding that moved through them without a single spoken word, and something in him settled. Not relief, not victory, but peace, the kind that comes when something hidden is finally allowed to exist in the open. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying away the last trace of that earlier tension, leaving behind only the ordinary sounds of a place returning to itself, but not to what it had been, to something more honest. Lucas reached down, his hand resting briefly against Shadow's shoulder, the familiar warmth grounding him in a way that no command ever could. "You stayed," he said quietly, and the words were simple, but they carried everything that had mattered. Shadow did not move, did not need to. His presence already the answer. In the distance, the sound of a gate closing echoed faintly, not as an end, but as a boundary being reset, one that no longer felt like confinement, but like understanding. Lucas looked out, across the base one last time, not with the eyes of someone leaving, but with the awareness of someone who had seen something that would remain long after he was gone. Sometimes the world does not change with noise or force. Sometimes it changes because one voice refuses to stay silent, because one presence stands when all others remain still, and in that quiet act, something larger begins to move. Lucas turned slightly, not toward the gate, but toward the path that led deeper into the base, not because he had been told to stay, but because for the first time, the choice belonged to him. And beside him, without command, without hesitation, Shadow rose and walked with him, not as a follower, not as a tool, but as something far more rare, a witness to a truth that had finally